Now, the Morning Majority on 630.
WMAL. 8:07 on WMAL. Good Wednesday morning to you. Brian Neiman, Joe DeGeneva, former U.S. prosecutor in the House this morning. And we're also joined now by David Freddoso, columnist, Washington Examiner, author of the book Gangsta Governments, Barack Obama and the New Washington Thugocracy. You don't pull any punches with that title, huh?
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, first question. The title of the book, Gangster Government, what's the origin of that phrase?
Yeah, this is something that was written by a colleague of mine at the Washington Examiner, Michael Barone, a couple of years ago now, back in 2009, when he was observing what was happening in the Chrysler bankruptcy, which we saw the Obama Treasury officials go to the secured creditors of that company who were owed about $7 billion and tell them, okay, folks, we're taking your money away. We're going to give it to a politically favored labor union. And if you resist us, then we will smear and vilify you using the White House as a platform, both in public and in private.
These were the bondholders.
And, well, the secured creditors,
right.
to be precise,
okay.
Who in any bankruptcy should have gotten paid out first. They have the absolute priority rule provides for that in bankruptcy court. The Obama administration effectively overturned 100 years of bankruptcy law with the way they manipulated that case. And the Supreme Court actually vacated the decision ultimately. But Barone wrote at that time, you've just seen an episode of Gangster Government, and we've seen so much more of that since then that, since the first time I talked to him about it, it seemed like, hey, somebody probably needs to write that book, and Michael was kind enough to write the foreword for Gangster Government.
By the way, Chrysler apparently paid off its debt to the United States. Is that accurate?
Yes and no. They paid off some very high interest rate loans that they had from the U.S. government, about 10% interest, and simultaneously received a large loan from the Department of Energy. So they're paying back the Treasury, they're getting a new loan from Energy, and they're refinancing their debt. So really what they're doing is they're kind of shuffling around a lot of money. You could say it's a legal case of money laundering. But, Chrysler should be making money by now. They should be paying off their debts. When you think about it, if they had that much debt wiped off their books because of the Obama administration's machinations, it would be incredible to imagine that they would still be doing that badly. And yet they are, because they're rock bottom as far as Consumer Reports goes. And, it's taken them this long to turn a profit. At least GM came out a lot stronger a lot earlier.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Was GM in the same boat when it comes to, the pushing and shoving of what they can and can't do? And are they in better financial shape than Chrysler? They
didn't have as many obligations. They didn't have all that secured debt. So it was a slightly different situation. But again, you still had this case where the UAW's interests were looked at. First and foremost, they were viewed as the top priority of everyone, which is still a question that I don't think we've ever had satisfactorily answered. Why were the UAW obligations, why did they come before those of other workers, as we saw with the Delphi company, how the non-union workers, their pensions are completely, they've been just plowed under in favor of the UAW, and why did the government make this such a top priority? Okay, I can hear the administration now saying, hey, we needed to do this. These companies were going to go under. It would have been devastating to the economy because we were on thin ice as it was. It could have pushed us into a real depression. And by the way, is it any different than what the Bush administration did in 2008 when it comes to TARP and essentially forcing banks and other entities to take money from the federal government? Well, it's a TARP, of course, is something that we saw coming up during the election that it was an unfortunate thing. Bush described it as, I'm destroying capitalism in order to save it. Right. President Obama, at the time, Senator Obama, gave it his wholehearted support, and it had to be there to pass the second tranche of it. And we had the Treasury Secretary at the time, Hank Paulson, I think deliberately deceiving Congress in order to get a blank check, which Bush took, and President Obama has run with as far as he can possibly go with it. how are the two different? How is the bailout of the auto industry different from TARP? In fact, it's the same bill. The one was used to justify the other.
Right.
So the TARP bill, which says we're going to deal with banks, however you feel about it, it doesn't say anything about dealing with GM and Chrysler, and yet that's exactly what was done. The Bush administration at first gave these bridge loans just to tide them over so that the Obama administration could deal with the companies. They never sought any further legislative approval for what they were doing, and I can't see how what they did was legal. The Treasury Secretary has to stipulate that these are financial institutions, which GM and Chrysler are not financial institutions. That's why they use words like included but not limited to in this law. But it was a blank check. Congress really abdicated. They allowed their authority to be usurped by President Obama, and he was all too happy to do so. I guess to return to the idea of gangster government and what it is a when you see an administration that is expanding its own power in ways that allow it to better help its friends and punish its enemies. This is a great case where you have a president who cut his political teeth in Chicago, is uniquely qualified to come in and take advantage of a situation like the one that existed after the TARP bill passed.
This is clearly a case of picking winners and losers.
Yeah.
And in this instance, they're doing the same thing with the waivers being granted under Obamacare. They're picking winners and losers. The winners are their friends. The losers are their enemies.
You know, Michael Barone actually has a great column in the Examiner today pointing out that now it's over half. It was in the 40%, but now it's over 50 of the workers covered by these waivers belong to labor unions. And I think that it's perhaps a sign, not so much that the administration is turning down lots and lots of other people, but what it's a sign of is the fact that this bill was specifically crafted to benefit his friends in organized labor and to completely muffle or prevent any pain on their behalf, while other Americans are about to see their health care change dramatically, see their premiums go up, see a lot of the quality of care go down. The unions have as much as a decade to prepare for any negative effects on that.
This is a remarkable scandal, and I can assure you, if this were a Republican administration doing this for corporations, the New York Times, the Washington Post would be all over this like a cheap suit. There is cricket silence out there about the corrupt nature of the granting of these waivers. They talk about these waivers being transparent. You can't find out anything about how these are granted and who's being denied.
Well, just think back to all of the bleeding that we heard about Halliburton and the supposedly corrupt relationship there. And let's just assume the worst about that for a second. That's $7 billion in no-bid contracts we're talking about.
Yeah.
And here we are talking about over $100 billion in stimulus contracts set aside for unions through project labor agreements. We're talking about an administration that has let organized labor completely off the hook from paying for the health care bill. We're seeing, you want to go through and look at all of these special favors to friends, to trial lawyers, to organized labor, to the green bandits that are cashing in on the stimulus package. And what you see is that, the level of favors in dollar terms is massive. The level in terms of precedents overturned, 100-year bankruptcy precedents, 75-year labor precedents, 45-year labor precedents, simply overturned overnight by Obama appointees. You see that there's a level of favoritism and cronyism in this administration that has not existed in previous administrations of either party.
You're saying you're right. I mean, $7 billion to Halliburton essentially for no bid contracts. People should look into that and figure
They
out,
should.
and absolutely should. But if it's 1,000 times worse during
Right.
this administration, you wonder why there's not the outcry that there was during the Bush administration.